Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're back here this week. We have a great episode for you today with my guest, Scott Calderwood. Scott is the president of Calderwood Search Partners, which is a boutique recruiting firm operating in North America. And Scott has over 30 years experience in corporations and as an entrepreneur. His firm largely works in the tech and engineering space. But what we talk about will be wider relevant. And we actually met through a mutual network and referral partners. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Thank you for being here today, Scott.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So in today's episode, what are we going to talk about? Well, we both work a lot in people dynamic space, right? So when we talk about businesses working on scaling or working on growth, there is a lot of common topics. And so let's start with the one that we see a lot, which is around the dynamics about CEO replacement. I've talked plenty on this podcast before that CEOs around the Series C or IPO stage get replaced at astonishing rates and not always voluntarily. We would like that to be a more positive and healthy experience and dynamic. And Scott, I understand that you've been involved frequently in that situation. Have you?
Yes, I've worked with many companies where either, like you said, the involuntary replacement, or we get tasked with doing a confidential search to find the right person that the board or the executive have decided to fill that position. Or what really sparked our initial conversation was the experience I had where I've had several CEOs put up their hands and say, I became the CEO just because, we started the company and I was it when the when the chairs were taken away, I was the one left standing. But they realized that they've hit their ceiling, that if the company is going to grow, that either they need someone to come in and take over as CEO or come in alongside them and to be able to have that expertise to take the company to the next level. And I really enjoyed that type of work and those type of conversations.
Yeah, and I think it's very positive when people realize, right, that they can do anything but not everything, and that as the business grows and changes, there's a different skill set needed, and investor confidence is attached to the capability of the senior leadership, and acknowledging that and dealing with the reality of that is a very positive development typically for the success of the business. So Scott, in these situations that you've experienced where the CEOs stood up themselves, what was typically the level of change where that started to be an issue, where the leader who got them there recognized that they themselves might not be the leader who will get them to the next stage?
Yeah, I'll start by saying I think it's a very mature response or attitude. And it's difficult, especially if this has been your baby, to be able to acknowledge that, we've hit a roadblock or we've stalled. We can't keep moving on because I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to do that. I don't have the skills or the background. So either someone, the latest replacement I did is the CEO was getting burnt out. He knew that he was beyond his capabilities. And he said, I want the new CEO to come in. I'm going to work with them for the first few months. Then I'm going to take a step back, a couple of tiers, and just do what I really love. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it really was time for that to change, because when I was able to find the right person, I proactively work with senior leaders and executives. So I went through this kickoff call with the current owner and CEO, and he described who they're looking for. And at the end of the call, I said, okay, well, I've got a really good handle on who you're looking for. I've got several people in mind, but I know who the successful candidate will be because I just met with them the other day, and you described them to the T, and you described exactly what they were looking for. And it was a really quick turnaround that I was correct of who that was. And they had an offer within 2 weeks, which isn't heard of in the C-suite space. But it was quite successful. There were some surprises for that new CEO. Unfortunately, that things weren't quite as good as we thought, but they were able to turn things around, and they're still thriving now. It just took a little bit of heavy lifting right up front.
Okay, well, let's go a little bit down that angle, or that rabbit. Well, it's not a rabbit hole; it's actually that lane. Yeah. So often, what I see in that space where there is an agreement, right, that there is replacement needed, or a different kind of leader, or somebody who will sit next to whoever is in charge in an operating COO role, or whatever way the structure has come about. There is a decision that there is a high caliber person needed to step in and take charge of the next phase. Often what gets brought up as a barrier is like, well, but we need this weird mix, and how are we going to find this weird mix, right? And your example is, of course, an excellent story where nobody ever got to bring up the argument, we need this weird mix, because in the first conversation you said, I have exactly what you need. That might not necessarily be typical at all in terms of speed, but in your experience, it is possible, right, to find the right person that has the right unique skill set and fit in these situations, as long as you work together with the right partners? Or what is it that makes that successful to find that fit?
It's all about cultural fit. So the skills and background, as long as we have a good understanding of that, that's a given. Once we nail that down, like any search that we do, whether it's mid-level individual all the way up to executive, we always start with an hour kickoff call. And it's like, yes, we have the job description. We know what certain criteria there, but what's the culture like in the company? What kind of person works well with you? What kind of behaviors are you looking for? And that you can have the most qualified person in the world, but if they're not a cultural fit, it's going to go very poorly, and it's going to be a very expensive exercise. And that's where we spend a lot of our time figuring that out. And so we do extensive background and work before a client ever sees a candidate, because we need to figure that out. And we gain that by understanding their cultural fit. And that example where I said, I know exactly who your person will be. And, I could have been wrong, because sometimes what you hear, and then when you get into reality, it's not, there's some other twists or other things like that. So we always, when we introduce our initial candidates, we want feedback right away, because, okay, are we on track? Did I understand what you explained? And that's where the work has to be done, is figuring that out. And can they come in? Because the worst thing you can have is someone that's not a fit. It's bad for everybody if that's not right.
Yeah, and I totally believe in the use of a matchmaker, like somebody like you in that space. I don't think that's a dating scene that you can do on your own as a leader, particularly because you're already so loaded and emotionally engaged around the subject.
Yes.
For me, the cultural fit is such a huge trust issue, right? What you typically see when you get to that tipping point where there needs to be a change out or a bit of a mix up in terms of the senior leadership, it's also about the fact that the span of control has got so disproportionately better, and that the autonomy that was relevant to grow the business changes somewhat, because there's other investors and there's way more stakeholders who need to be kept in the loop, and in some way, shape, or form need to be part of the decision-making process, right? Even if the ultimate decision-making is still with the business leader, there's many more parties who need a say, who need to be involved. And And that's a very different game. And so realizing that you might need to move out of that is one thing, but if there's then something stepping into that who you don't have a click with, where you as the existing leader are kind of like, well, I gotta wait and see about this guy or this girl. That's not helpful, because then that transition of responsibilities doesn't function and will go way too slow. And if it doesn't function from day one, my experience, it becomes seldom very effective, does it?
No, not at all. I was working with a client several months ago that they hired in a senior leader, not CEO. It was a chief operating officer. And they didn't do the extra due diligence with the cultural fit and just how they lead. And they spent 6 months with this individual and it didn't work out. And so the other person left a great job to come to this opportunity. They, took the chance on them, and it was very poor. So you really have to do your due diligence up front. And the one thing that I didn't mention is I really like behavioral analytics for just a portion of the decision making. Where I see, we like McQuake. We use McQuake. Okay. It's a company out of Canada, actually, but their surveys are like 10, 15 minutes, and they produce similar results to the ones that are like an hour and a half to produce. But when you have that extra information, it gives you a great ability to be able to look and see, okay, where do they fit? Where should we question? What should we look at just to poke around? Again, it's maybe 20% of your decision, maybe a little bit more, but where companies make a mistake is they make that 70 or 80% of their decision making. And they're pretty accurate, but not 80% accurate as far as I'm concerned. So they're just very helpful.
Yeah, it takes some of the bias out of the decision making, right? Because there is a stupendous amount of biases that come into this, and we talk about that plenty in this podcast too. I don't like actually your example of that CEO who was there for 6 months and then things didn't work out, because ultimately then there's losers all around, right? Because from a business continuity perspective, you're changing out leadership because you need that. And it typically takes a while to admit that you needed that. So you've already spent some time kind of getting ready for the notion it needs to happen. And then you do it. And then if it's then not the right person, the loss on all sides is significant, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about something I've heard you talk about before, the bad hire calculator?
Oh, yeah. On one of my websites, Pinnacle Search International, I own 2 brands, but there's a link to a bad hire calculator. And it's interesting where executives, boards will think, well, recruitment's really expensive. But it's really interesting when you break it down. You bring someone on, you have your team training them, you have them digging into the business that's supposed to be moving things forward. No matter what the position is, if you're hired, you're moving something forward. And just the cost of lost salary, the time that you paid other people to do the work, like there's so many things that stack up. The recruitment fee becomes a very little part of that at the end of the day. And it's really good to understand that hiring the right person in the first place. We hear about companies that bring on people and, they leave after 2 months or 3 months or whatever that is. It also hurts your company's reputation, because it's like, well, why candidates ask me all the time is, why is this role open? Oh, someone was in there and they're only there for 4 months. Like you can't hide stuff like that. It's our job is to be transparent. We're very, as much as we're our client focused, we're very candidate focused, because this is an impact to their lives. And and
it goes kind of hand in hand with the bias that somehow sunk costs always feel bigger to us than future expenses. And it's a little bit so that applies to personnel and staff too, right? So we hold on to the wrong thing because we've invested, right? And we've invested emotionally and relationship wise. And And that makes, I think, in people's heads also the cost of finding the right person and the time it takes to find the right person bigger, disproportionately bigger, right? And it's somewhat disconnected from reality. So I love that you created that calculator, because I'm a big proponent of, if you have these true risks or hurdles in your head, I always say, okay, can you try and quantify those? Because whatever you come up with in your head is probably worse than what you
Yes.
really can calculate, right? It's amazing how we can fool ourselves a little bit, or
Well, and people don't think about it because there's not an invoice attached to that. You actually have to sit down and think about lost business, check,
it's indirect impacts, right?
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
Yeah. And your example shows that you can find somebody in a couple of days. I just want to pitch a.
Let me rephrase. I spend significant time meeting people proactively, and a bit of a passion project. I help passively market people. I consult. I help people, even if they're working with other recruiters. I'll have CFOs call me and say, Scott, I've got another offer with another recruiter. I've got an offer, but I want to negotiate. I just need another opinion. And so I'm happy to do that. The goal is to get people, that next job, that next step. And I believe that things all work out in the end. So I'm always happy to help.
But it's quick. It can be quick. It's not always quick. Of course it's not, right? But it can be quick if you enlist the right partner who actually has a network, right? And know where to find those candidates and can speed up that process. So that's your side of the things. I'd say the other side, from where I sit in more the triage space, when I come in and these situations exist, there are some solutions we can put in place to create that time for you to do that recruitment and do that right? So in some situations, that really means hiring an interim person, because you don't know if you really need somebody in a position, but you need somebody on site to do things now. And to me, an interim person is overqualified and is a job hopper, right? So is naturally somebody who will read into the situation and is overqualified, so can be effective and is tuned on some specific priorities, right? So they might not be so engaged on your long-term people management. They're there for your business continuity purposes. But we can also work with solutions within your organization, right? And tee something up with the team that you have, and some temporarily moving around of people, stripping down task packages to the bare minimum or the must happen, to create that time to bring somebody in. So I think we're trying to take away your excuses to not hire, right? Because the last thing I do want to talk about before we run out of time is that I think we both truly believe that if you hire right, and you spend that time to get the right people in, that is what truly creates agility and resilience and flexibility in your business to grow and evolve and deal with whatever comes at you, right, Scott?
Absolutely. If you don't have the right person, or you don't feel, I always go back to cultural fit, because it also gives you comfort. If you have the right cultural fit, you can trust that person. You can let go a little bit. You know that things can get done, and there's an understanding. If you don't have that fit, there's a mistrust there, and there's always something in the back of your mind saying, I don't know if I can let go of this, and you cause yourself more issues and challenges that way than by getting the right person in at the right time.
Yeah. And you see that in disaster response or in the military. And then people say, but people there have very strict hierarchy and very strict job descriptions. Yes and no. Yes, of course they do. But these teams also train together a lot. So they know each other's idiosyncrasies, and they know when they improvise, it doesn't take a lot or when they have to improvise, it doesn't take a lot to divide up the task, because it's very clear, even if it doesn't fit with their core job description, who's the best one to pick up the slack on subject A, B, or C, right? And for that, you need to create that team that actually can click and operate together. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And our core business is mostly working with small, mid-sized corporations. And almost every search that we work on, we're looking for someone with an entrepreneurial spirit. They're not living in a little box, just doing certain tasks with a really strict job description. They're having to wear many hats and have to have the motivation and drive to do that, to see a need, fill a need, you know, it's from some movie or something. But anyway.
Yeah. And I would challenge that we've labeled that an entrepreneurial skill set. We've also started this episode saying, listen, what is that entrepreneurial skill set is not the skill set that gets you in a larger scale operation, typically where there's way more interfaces and collaborations. But I think what people are really saying is people with a sense of agility and improvisation skills, right? And people who are not going to say when something happens, oh, that's not in my job description, so I'm just not dealing with it, because the world doesn't operate like that anymore. No,
and it's a state of mind of how you operate, and you want the best outcome, not just I'm just doing this. No. Most of the work we work on, if anyone ever has the attitude of that's not my job description, they're probably not going to be a fit for the client.
No. And to me, that is about your decision-making skills, your communication skills, your ability to work with others, but also when the going gets tough. And I haven't talked about that in a while, but I always say there's these situations where everybody's standing around and something happened and everybody looks at each other and who picks it up. And in those moments, you want the people who regularly will put up their hand and say, well, I guess it's me, right? Today in the land of the blind, I'm one eye. I'm also not the specialist, but I guess out of all of us, I'm better placed than most, and I will have a go at it and come back if I need more help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Be part of the team and to help make things happen. It's I find it very exciting. I'm pretty passionate about it. Impacting how companies can succeed is really what recruiters do, is by finding the right person and the right fit for that organization that helps them get to the next levels. Yeah.
And your business needs to be based on something, right? So that could be a very good technical product or whatever, but the only thing that makes it successful is the people. So
absolutely.
Pretty critical, right? Yeah, it's very clear that you're passionate about this subject, and so am I. So we could easily talk another 17 episodes for sure.
Absolutely.
But what I heard today is, we started off talking about CEO replacement. That change out in senior leadership is hard. It's best done if it's proactive and in a nicer constructive atmosphere. So self-recognition would be great in that. But it's a normal thing and it's a big challenge. And there is specialists like you who can help with that. There is no excuse to not, make sure you got recruitment right. And you've advocated clear and loud that cultural fit is everything, because that creates your flexibility and your resilience and your agility as a team, right? And ultimately, your business continuity and success. Making a change and ending up with something that was worse than you had before is nothing anybody ever wanted, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So Scott, if people want some of your magic or help after hearing you here today, where do they go? Where do they find you?
To learn a little bit more, I mentioned earlier, I have two brands. Pinnacle Search International is our kind of umbrella company, but my primary brand is Calderwood Search Partners. And our website's very simple, calderwoodsearch.com. And my email address is scott@calderwoodsearch.com. So very simple to engage. I welcome any kind of conversations. I love to meet new people. And again, I work with people that are looking for work as well and help consult on that. We do some proactive marketing of those individuals. We don't charge for it. It's more of a passion project for me. There's a lot of people that have been hurting the last couple of years with all of the turmoil in the market and industry. So I put together a passive marketing program just to help get people more exposure in the market. So anyway, if you're interested in chatting, just please reach out and we'll set up a time to talk.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. And we will make sure that you can find all those links and more about Scott also in the show notes, wherever you are listening to this episode. Scott, I want to thank you so much for being here. I truly enjoyed our conversation. And I think the summary of it all is if you put the right kind of people together, you can create magic, right? So let's put the right people together in the right places.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for tuning in. I hope to hear or see you back in the next episode. And goodbye for today. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Emergency Room. If today's episode hit home, let me know. Leave a review and tell me what challenges you're facing. Your feedback helps shape future episodes. So drop a comment or a message on LinkedIn with what's keeping you up at night.